1993, Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act explored ways to decrease gun violence. The act imposed a 5-day waiting period for a handgun and background checks for any federal licensed dealer purchases. Since enacted, the law has prevented 2 million guns from falling into the wrong hands and has decreased gun violence. Before the Brady Bill, there were few gun laws. In 1934, Franklin D. Roosevelt tried to stop gangsters from getting possession of machine guns during Prohibition, so he made a $200 tax for any purchase of a gun. In 1938, the government established that you have to have a license to buy a gun. In 1968, due to the loss of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King, who were all victims of gun violence, the government required dealers to have a list of people that were not allowed to buy guns. The government also determined the laws of who should be put on the list. On March 30th, 1981, President Ronald Reagan was walking down the street after a speaking engagement in the Washington Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. He had been in office for only 69 days. A man named John Hinckley attempted to assassinate him. Hinckley wanted to impress the actress Jodie Foster. He had been obsessed with her since he had seen the film Taxi Driver. He approached the president and his men and pulled out his gun. He fired 5 or 6 shots. One hit President Reagan in the ribs and punctured his lung and caused internal bleeding. The other bullets hit James Brady and 3 others. Brady was shot in the head. His injuries were severe. He was left permanently paralyzed. President Reagan recovered after surgery and a couple of days of rest. In response to this tragedy, Sarah Brady, the wife of James Brady, was determined to get stricter gun laws.
As I talked to Sarah, she became involved in the movement in 1986. And the reason she did is because her son, Scott.
Some friends came to pick Scott and me up and take us swimming, and Scott and I jumped into the pickup truck. And as we did, Scott picked up a gun off the seat. And as I took that gun from Scott, the cold reality hit me that it was a fully loaded .22 that my child had picked up, and how close again we came to another tragedy.
That gun changed Sarah Brady from housewife to lobbyist.
She became involved in their several organizations to recruit support for new gun laws.
Sarah walking through the halls of Congress, calling Congress people cowards.
Sarah Brady.
You'd know when they voted your way, and then the ones that, and they'd feel guilty.
That had their tail between their legs, and you'd see them.
They'd avoid us like the
I
plague.
hope you'll still consider our amendment.
Press Secretary Jim Brady and his wife Sarah used all the emotional ammunition in their arsenal.
We were constantly out lobbying and talking. And
A dog and pony show.
Jim and I do a lot of what he calls dog and pony shows around the country, speaking, and he always echoes me.
Dog.
Partially due to her efforts, the first new law was introduced in Congress by Charles E. Schumer in 1987. However, the law was never brought to vote because the influence of the NRA was too strong, so they went back and forth until the bill was reintroduced in March of 1991. The final version was passed on November 11, 1993. The bill was signed by Bill Clinton on November 30th. The law went into effect on February 22, 1994.
I support the Brady bill, and I urge the Congress to enact it.
It went through 3 presidents. It went through 7 years before it actually became law.
What we are witnessing today is more than a bill signing, is the end of unchecked madness and the commencement of a heartfelt crusade for a safer and saner country.
The law states a 5-day waiting period and a background check for any firearm purchases from a licensed dealer. In the background checks, they make sure you haven't been convicted in court of any crime or sentenced to prison for over 1 year. Currently, 92% of the background checks are done through the National Instant Background Check System, the NICS, while the FBI is still on the phone with the gun dealer. Sometimes you might have to wait 5 days for a response. If you don't get a response within the 5 days, the law requires the dealer to sell you a gun without the complete background check. If you fail the background check, you can never buy a gun, and it's illegal to attempt to buy a gun again. The Brady Bill has stopped 2 million guns from being sold and has conducted over 202 million background checks. In the first year, only 217 were rejected. Since the law was enacted in 1994, in the states that expanded background checks, 39% fewer police officers were murdered by guns and 38% fewer women were murdered by their partners by guns. 40% of guns are still sold mainly at gun shows and on the internet without a background check. That's why 90% of people want the Brady Bill background checks expanded.
An untold number of people are alive today who otherwise wouldn't be, thanks to Jim and his courageous wife, Sarah.
Their leadership, their vision, their determination is a model to everyone else.
I think Jim and Sarah Brady are the very best example of what it is to be courageous.
The Brady Bill has sparked a lot of conflict between people that want more gun rights and people that want stricter gun laws. Some people think the solution to gun violence is having more responsible people carry guns and having no gun-free zones.
If some of those folks that were just slaughtered in Paris, if a couple of guns were in that room that were held by the good guys, you would have had a totally different story, let me tell you. And I can say that about a lot of these crazy attacks. You have gun-free zones in this country. We have gun-free zones on our military bases.
A gun isn't violent in itself. If you can talk about police. Are police violent because they have guns on their hips? Police aren't violent people, are they? Then why do we develop a term to associate a tool with violence? A tool can be used to save a life as just as easily as it can be used to take a life.
Others think that if no one has a gun, there would be no gun violence.
Most people in America, 92% the last I checked, and 85% of gun owners support these common sense measures. You know, universal background checks, closing the gun show loophole, closing the online and Charleston loopholes. So I think more people are getting frustrated by, you know, the refusal of representatives to stand with the majority of Americans, the majority of gun owners, and take on the gun lobby. You know, if you are trying to keep people paying dues and supporting your organization, you want to keep them upset. Mm-hmm. And so the NRA 30, 40 years ago was not the NRA of today. Today, they want people to feel like, you know, the black helicopter is going to land in the backyard and your guns are going to be taken. Totally, unbelievably untrue. But it does create doubt, and then they just drive right through that. So we have to do a better job.
Not since the year the Brady Bill was enacted has there been any major gun laws passed by the U.S. Congress because of the massive influence of the gun lobby and the NRA. Since Columbine, approximately 141 people have died in school shootings like in San Bernardino, California, Charleston, South Carolina, Colorado Springs, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Roseburg, Oregon, and Newtown, Connecticut.
Our unalienable right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, those rights were stripped from college kids in Blacksburg and Santa Barbara, and from high schoolers at Columbine, and from first graders, and from every family who never imagined that their loved one would be taken from our lives by a bullet from a gun. Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad.
In response to recent mass shootings, in 2016, President Obama addressed public concern by making an executive order about gun control.
Number one, anybody in the business of selling firearms must get a license and conduct background checks or be subject to criminal prosecutions. It doesn't matter whether you're doing it over the internet or at a gun show. It's not where you do it, but what you do. We're also taking steps to make the background check system more efficient.
Historically, the United States has had a difficult experience with guns and gun violence. Thanks to the efforts of Sarah and James Brady, many people are alive today because of the Brady Bill. Hopefully, in the future, the U.S. will be a safer place and gun violence will be less common.